Hello and welcome to Take Back Time. My name is Penny Zenker and I'm your host. And today, I'm excited. I have Pam Harper with me and she's a dear friend. We just went through a really fun high-level speakers course together and we've got a lot in common, a lot of ways of thinking about things. So Pam is an internationally known Keynote and TEDx speaker and founder and partner and CEO of Business Advancement, Inc., a strategic growth advisory firm based in the New York City metro area. And she's got a lot of different accolades. She has a critically acclaimed book, Preventing Strategic Gridlock, which is read in business schools around the world. So without further ado, you can read her bio, but let's hear from her brilliance directly. Pam, welcome to the show.
Oh, Penny, it's good to be together. We've been through a lot here.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
I'm sure everybody feels that way, right? With where we are today, that we've been through a lot.
Absolutely. In fact, that's what I hear all the time. How are you? We're going through a lot. No.
So maybe we'll just start there. When people, leaders especially, right? Because they're expected to know how to get out of this, how to forge their way forward, how to bring about, great change when change is necessary, but they might feel stuck. They might not know what the next steps are. How do you advise leaders when they might be in that place where there's a lot expected of them and it's a little overwhelming?
Well, funny you should say that, because one of the things, I actually had a conversation with somebody not that long ago, and I walked into his office and he just had this look of daze on his face. And this is a successful company, like, oh my
You're
God.
in the headlights, like.
Yes. And successful company, award-winning company. And it was because of that very success that he was looking like he was. Like, we've got to move faster. Everything's important. And that he was feeling the tremendous pressures from the board, from his C-suite, from the employees, from the industry, from customers. There's such a list, investors.
Sure.
And that's true for so many companies and so many CEOs that we're all dealing with, having many stakeholders. And the issue is everybody has different agendas. And so when somebody says, well, what should I do? What's next? We are at a point now where it's really tempting to say, as I have other people say, well, we're just going to keep going the way we were. There's too much. We can't focus on that. We've got to focus on doing this right, executing. And that's where I start to see the orbit, what I call the orbit of the status quo, going round and round in circles. We did this before, it worked before, we got good results before, quarterly results say, this is what we should be doing. And so there's pressures for the CEO to be both visionary and also at the same time to stay with, well, we always did this well, why should we break it? And there are lots of books that say, well, if it's not broken, break it. But it's another thing to be dealing with it in reality.
Oh, for sure,
So,
right? Definitely,
exactly.
And to talk about and write about than to do it. But
exactly.
I think the very success, I just want to point out what you just said. I mean, sometimes it's that very success that gets us caught in that, what did you call it? I like that.
The orbit of the status quo.
I wrote it down here. It's that very success because, well, if you change something or you look to innovate, what if it doesn't work? What if you're not successful anymore? That's a big pressure in itself, right?
Exactly. And that is what a lot of companies are facing, whether they are classic innovation companies or they're innovating just to keep on being responsive in the changing world. And so my whole background has been about trying to help people stay at pace with what's going on. The world's going like way far beyond what anybody thought it would. And so we have to look at, how do we break the orbit of the status quo? A lot of people know that they should be doing something, it's not always easy to know that you're actually in the status quo.
So how do we know? How do we know if we're stuck in that orbit?
Well,
Are there some questions that we can ask or
yes,
something like that?
I think the easiest way to do it is to look at is what should be happening really what is happening.
But what does that mean? I mean, should be according to who, according to what? Like, help me help others who are listening, because it's right. It's kind of vague. Like, what does that mean? Should be.
Okay,
happening?
what should be happening? Well, most of us in our heart of hearts know what should be happening. We should be responsive to the emerging markets. We should be responsive to our customers. We should be making certain revenue goals, profitability goals. We should have employee retention at a certain rate. We should have a lot of things that are in place. And so what happens is that we don't necessarily have that really happening. We may make decisions thinking that those decisions are going to enable what should happen. I think of it as the formal culture of a company, the governance. We're going to put together a strategy. That strategy is going to work. That's what should happen, right, Penny? We have this strategy. It should work. We have values. Those values should be taking effect. That should be what's happening. And on a personal level, for your listeners who are not leading companies, but are leading themselves, we all have personal goals. This is what should be happening. I should be progressing in my career at a certain rate. I should be making X amount of dollars. I should be getting other rewards. So there's always something that we know that we should be having happen. But then you contrast that with what is happening.
Okay.
And what may happen is we say, well, that should be happening, but you know what? This keeps happening. I'm in this pattern. So if it's a company, what we may find is that the strategy should work, but guess what? We're missing goals.
So it's recognizing what's not working, what goals you're not reaching, or what elements of your strategy are not being fulfilled at the level that you've set out. I'm not a fan of the word should. So, and I don't know if anybody else is, because we could talk an hour about just that. But am I getting that right? Is that it's really that we're not getting the result that we set out to get?
Oh, that's right.
Or when you say pace, I really like that. Or it's not growing at the pace that we need to be in the future. So it's not preparing us for where we need to be in 2 years or 5 years, so that we're at pace with the changes in the marketplace. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that those are valid things. I think should also goes, though, to what we tell ourselves that we want. And we should see this because it represents a milestone. And for anybody out there who has performance reviews, they're being evaluated against what should happen, unfortunately. I agree with you. Should is a word that, it's complex. And complexity is, just part of it. But I also look at what is happening.
Absolutely.
And,
right. Be really clear on where you really are. So how do you challenge where you really are? Because sometimes we aren't being honest with ourselves as to where we really are.
Well, that's a really good point. I think one of the things that we need to do is to look at, you could say, I want to be at this level in my career, or we want to be at this level in our company, and to say, okay, it's not happening. And then you need to start looking at why, what's not happening. In fact, one of the things that we put out together, I opened with a story of a person who said, I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do and everything's important. Right. And I said to him, it sounds like you need to do some triage and start looking at what really has to be at the top. And it was hard for him to admit, it's hard for people to admit sometimes that what they think should be happening. And I use the word because I hear it from people.
Sure.
I'm not saying whether it's good or bad, but I
Sure.
am saying that it is a word that people use a lot. And I say you need to look for the evidence. And when evidence is not appearing, where do you find evidence that this wonderful goal that you've set for yourself is or is not happening? And so I came up with a resource, which you can have for your listeners, talking about 5 questions to ask when you need to move even faster, because that's the feeling. People need to feel like they have momentum to be able to move even faster.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is that this orbit of the status quo can be very challenging to get out of unless you start asking the questions about where do you really want to go? Is that really happening? So if you want to take it out of should, where do you want to go?
Yeah.
Is it,
Well, I'm just giving the listeners an alternative. Should is fine. Some people might resonate with that. I'm just giving also some other language to it so that everybody's understanding it as the same thing, right?
And I agree with you. I agree with you 100% that it's whatever language we use, but it's that idea that there is an ideal and where you want to go, and then there's what's really happening. And it takes courage to actually confront that.
It does, for sure.
And say, okay, this is not, happening.
In your questions, do you challenge the goal? Because sometimes we set goals that aren't the right goals, and there's a reason why we're not reaching them. A, maybe because they're not the right goals.
Yeah.
And B, because not everybody's, we might not have the right metrics to actually reach that overarching objective, right? We might have some things in between that take us in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Talk to that for a second.
Right. Well, one of the big things that is different in this particular resource is the emphasis on our stakeholders, which sounds like corporate jargon, I know, but it's literally people who have a stake in the outcome. And you have personal stakeholders.
Sure.
And the more people who have a stake in your success and the outcome, who know where you're trying to go, is how you can begin to move forward. So the goal, for instance, or the purpose may be clear in your head, but other people don't know it. And so that's one of the ways that people either can get stuck or can actually break out. And looking also at, well, what are we doing as an organization, for instance, that's enabling us to take on more? If we need to move in a dramatically different direction because the world is changing, we want to take advantage of an emerging opportunity, for instance, which is a lot of the work that I deal with. You've got an existing company right now. Could you actually, do you have the bandwidth to be able to do that? And so it means being honest and saying, we can't do things the way we always were doing it, that orbit of the status quo. What are we going to do? And all these questions, there are 5, they're just 5, but it has to do with looking at the evidence that you actually can or do have enough people who know what you're looking to do, that are supportive of what you're looking to do, that there's capability to do what you need to do, that people have the ability to make decisions.
Right.
So
can we go into 1 or 2 of those questions, and then they can download, the rest of the resource. But before we do that, what triggered for me, and it brought a smile to my face, is I remember when I was working on the executive team as this, market research company. And I remember hearing people say, we don't have a strategy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We communicate that strategy all the time. It's this. So it's interesting that there's a disconnect about what you think you're communicating, right? Because you can communicate it once or 100 times, but if people aren't receiving it, like, I don't know whether they didn't think that what we said was our strategy was even a strategy. Do you know what I mean? So it's there's just this disconnect because people have different vernacular, they have a different understanding maybe of what they think a strategy should be or look like. We'll come to the should, right?
Right. Well, we all have different ways of taking in the world. Exactly. Right. In fact, one of the things going on that question, because that question, the actual question is, everyone in our organization understands our purpose and strategic priorities enough to quickly make appropriate decisions in response to the changing business environment. Kind of a long way of saying what you just said. And do we have a strategy? And
no, but I think very specifically, you put some things in there that are critical to make that very actionable and very very clear to determine, right? When you say to make quality decisions,
that's right.
Move forward, that's so critical, right? Is because you've got to have clarity in order to have the confidence and the courage to make those decisions. And if you don't feel that you have that clarity, then you're not gonna make those decisions. You're gonna push them off. You're gonna hand them to somebody else, right? Or something like that. So I think that's a fantastic.
And so to go with this, there is a story that I was working with a company, and there was a tremendous gap between where the CEO really wanted to go and the rest of the organization. It was a mid-market size company. So they were in and around the $100 million marker. And they were supposed to go in one direction, and they were having a tremendous morale problem and couldn't figure out why. People weren't making decisions. The productivity was sliding. They were starting to miss goals. What's going on? And what came out, at first they had done a 360, the opinions, what's going on with people. And CEO couldn't understand what was coming back. He said, they're whining. I don't understand what's going on. And so we took another approach to getting information. And what we found out was that a lot of things that were going on in the company were positioning them for growth. They were having their best year ever. And people saw what was happening, but they did not have reliable communication about what was behind that. And so people didn't feel good about making decisions. They did not feel like there was a strategy. They did not feel like they could do anything. So if I were to take this first question, for evidence, that CEO would have to say, there's not evidence that they can do this, because in this area, they're not making decisions. They're taking forever to make the decisions, for example.
Right. And decisions are what help us to move faster, right? So
that's right.
Make those decisions in a confident way, right? With the just the amount of information that we need, we can keep ourselves moving forward faster.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. So we're definitely going to, for those of you who are listening, whether it's here with us on the date that it's gone out, or maybe it's even a year later, go click on that link and make sure that you get that those 5 questions, because we can already hear from the first one that there's a lot of value in those. I don't want to go through them all, because I want to give people that extra resource, right, to get them through your resource. And plus, we're coming a little bit to the end of the time, and I want to talk about some other things as well. So one of the things I want to ask, and I ask every guest this, is just because I get so many different answers, I think it's interesting. What's your definition of productivity and why?
Okay, well, that goes back again to what I was saying earlier. For me, is what should be happening really what is happening.
Okay.
And when you have that alignment between the two, then you have the ability to achieve goals and move forward for whatever it is you're trying to do.
Okay, awesome. I know we talked about offline a little bit about complexity. So I thought we'd just take a couple minutes to talk about complexity. We live in a complex world. Our businesses are complex. The bigger they are, right? The more maybe complex the projects are, the more complex the organizational charts and activities are, and so forth. So, how do you help people to approach the complexity that there is within the organization, leaders?
Sure. Well, I actually look at things in terms of complexity is something not to be feared, but in fact to be welcomed, because it's within the complexity that you see the paradoxes, where there may be people may be seeing problems, but there are opportunities. And when you're trying to grow into an area that you've never been in before, there are particular leadership paradoxes that I found. We won't have time for that today, but the point is that helping people to learn and understand what those paradoxes are, because they're very predictable. So complexity is—
give it just at a high level without digging into it. What would
Sure, I call them the growth igniters paradoxes.
Okay.
And the growth igniters paradoxes are three particular paradoxes that show up in the midst of uncertainty and ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to do with moving in a new direction, pulling on the orbit of that status quo, and also dealing with the trust and developing the trust that it takes to foster relationships that give you the momentum to keep on going. Mm-hmm. And they apply personally and they apply to businesses as well.
Okay. Awesome. I thought we'd just drop it in there a little bit. And then of course we can always come back and do another show just on those paradoxes, right?
Sure.
I think paradoxes are very interesting for us to understand that. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's how I define a paradox is that they can both exist at the same time.
They're contradictions, and there
right,
is
they're contradictions, but they're real, right? They're contradictions, yes. But we live in a world of contradictions, right?
That's exactly right. So and that's where the opportunities are. Yes.
Totally. So that's how you see the complexity is that's it. How do you have somebody, a leader, to be able to see those opportunities or have the leader influence their people so that the people see that complexity as an opportunity versus a problem?
Well, I talk about it in my keynote, for starters. And also because we have identified those, we do work with the leadership teams, especially, to help them understand how that could be impacting on what their own particular goals and vision are.
So is there a little tip, a nugget that you can share with us here?
I think the first is that when you are aware that there are contradictions and that, or rather paradoxes, that's the first step. When you know what to look for. Yeah, when you know what to look for, it is predictable and you can move past it.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I mean, we could just go on and on, but I know that people today have, the attention span of a gnat. So you've dropped a lot of golden nuggets here. Let's let people process that, step back and take some notes and think about what they can take away and how they could apply it to their business.
That's wonderful. They could also listen to Growth Igniters Radio. So
I was just going to ask you is where can they reach you? What are some links? Yeah. We'll have them all in the show notes, but if you want to share your website or anything that they can hear, you let us know where they should go.
Okay. First of all, for the keynote I mentioned, Pam Harper speaks. and you can get a little background on this whole idea of the paradoxes, orbit of the status quo. For Growth Igniters Radio, that's a weekly podcast that we do. We hope you're going to be a guest on Growth Igniters Radio as well. We have a lot to talk about, but we also talk about some of these issues of the paradoxes there. My book is Preventing Strategic Gridlock. You can find it on Amazon, and businessadvance.com is the website for other materials and the 5 questions to ask.
And all those links for everybody who's listening will be part of the show notes that you can access all of those from there. Well, Pam, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Penny, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for being here and taking in some of today's nuggets. I think we talked about some really important aspects that a leader needs to be aware of. And I think really critically what Pam said is so critical, is that it's first about awareness. Awareness in what we talked about initially is knowing where you are and where you should be or where you want to be. And just that awareness of understanding what's in the gap is going to help you to be specific in closing the gap, right? We talked about understanding the complexity and the paradoxes that are present within our businesses and our relationships and everything else. So that's what you guys get to take away and to think and to bring. That is, if nothing more, is just to bring that heightened awareness of some of these important parts of the business, is also in your communication for your strategy we talked about. So if you just did one thing in each of those areas, or just took one of those and worked on that, you'd see amazing change in your leadership and in your business. So these were really golden nuggets. My name is Penny Zenker, and this is Take Back Time. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.